But with that, let me turn it over to Senator Kaine.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and to my committee members. I actually was really enjoying that. And Rep. Raskin, so good to have you here before us. This hearing reminds me of one that I had in the Foreign Relations Committee in early 2017, where we were considering the confirmation of Rex Tillerson, the former CEO of Exxon Mobil, to be Secretary of State. And I asked him, Mr. Chair, a set of the same questions that this hearing is digging into, and he basically said that he couldn't answer them, even though he was well aware of what ExxonMobil had done in this space with respect to their obfuscation around climate science. And at one point I said, now, are you telling me you can't answer them or you won't answer them? And he was very honest. He said, yeah, I'm telling you both. And really it was more that he wouldn't answer them. And I can see why. The committee's investigative work has laid out a pretty important record, I think, of efforts by these companies to mislead the public. But what I want to focus my questions on is the efforts by the oil companies to mislead Congress or just not cooperate with Congress. And I understand in the House investigation, I'd like you to talk about this a little bit, Representative Raskin, that there was many instances of refusal to cooperate with the investigation by ExxonMobil and others. Could you just describe that a bit?
Well, when we first sent out the requests, as I was describing before, we got a mountain of minutia and distracting material, newsletters and press releases and so on. We then used our subpoena power to get more serious, and we got more serious answers, but still we had thousands of documents that were redacted in substantial and perhaps critical ways. That would be my suspicion. And there were entire documents that we never received at all. And this is why, I close my remarks by invoking Jared Diamond's book, Collapse, which is all about how if you have a small group in society that's invested in a particular model that's dangerous to everyone and they're allowed to get away with it, that becomes a telltale sign of a potential collapse of the society. And so when the United States Congress comes calling, you owe it to the Congress, the representatives of the people, to give the information. The Supreme Court has repeatedly found, you guys know these cases, I'm sure, McGain versus Daugherty is one of them, but the Supreme Court has been adamant that we have the right to get the information that we want in order to legislate. We're the representatives of the people.
I want to ask about one particular reason asserted by at least one of the companies, and maybe more, for not producing documents that I found kind of Alice in Wonderland-like. We are not going to give you these documents because sharing information would violate our First Amendment rights. Now, you are a constitutional law professor, and by my recollection, the First Amendment with respect to speech says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech.
Yeah.
It is a right, whether or not the First Amendment should have been applied to corporations, we'll set that one aside. Yeah. It has been applied, and so corporations have a right to speak. But the notion that a corporation would claim their First Amendment gives them a right not to share information, to hide information that they're embarrassed by, even in the face of a congressional subpoena, strikes me as like, that's the opposite of the First Amendment.
I think you're right. I mean, giving them their due, the Supreme Court has found in cases like West Virginia versus Barnett that there is a right not to speak against conscience. But the Supreme Court has always found that turning over documents is an objective act that doesn't compel you to do something against your own political ideas. So that would obviously lead to the end of our civil and criminal discovery system if the First Amendment gave you the right not to turn over documents.
Well, I was a trial lawyer for a while. I'm not one of John Kennedy's acumen or flamboyance. But I was a pretty good one.
I deny everything.
but I will say you can always tell when an objection is made if it is an extremely unpersuasive, novel, imaginative, unsupported objection. You can always tell there's something they really don't want you to see.
Yeah.
And I think that the investigation contains an awful lot of material that the public needs to see, but I can only imagine the extent of the iceberg under the water that you are not allowed to see. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.